Long before Rome rose from the hills of Italy, before Athens reached the height of its glory, and before the great empires of Persia and Macedonia reshaped the ancient world, there was Babylon, a city born from the rich black soil of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, where some of the earliest chapters of human civilization were first written. In that land of rivers, mud brick, temples, and kings, people learned to build cities, to measure the heavens, to record laws, and to imagine that power itself could be made eternal. And out of that world, slowly at first and then with astonishing force, Babylon rose until its name became larger than history, larger than empire, and almost larger than life itself. At first, there was nothing inevitable about Babylon's greatness. It was not the oldest city in Mesopotamia, nor the most powerful, nor the most sacred. For generations, it stood among stronger rivals, overshadowed by older kingdoms and older traditions, a place of local importance but not yet of world-changing destiny. Yet history is often transformed not by what seems greatest in one moment, but by what proves most resilient, most cunning, and most prepared when opportunity arrives. That opportunity came in the reign of Hammurabi, the ruler who changed Babylon from a minor city into the beating heart of an empire. He was not merely a conqueror with armies at his command, but a patient architect of power, a king who understood that true domination required more than victory in battle. It demanded order, law, administration, fear, legitimacy, and the appearance of permanence. Under Hammurabi, Babylon expanded across the fertile lands of Mesopotamia and subdued rival cities that had once looked down upon it. Through warfare, diplomacy, and political skill, he gathered power into his hands and turned Babylon into the center of a growing kingdom whose authority stretched across river valleys, trade routes, and ancient urban networks. Yet what made Hammurabi's name echo through history was not only conquest, but the extraordinary decision to carve law into stone and present it to the world as something visible, fixed, and enduring. His famous code was harsh, unequal, and far removed from modern ideas of justice, but it represented a revolutionary concept that power could speak through written law, that order could be displayed publicly, and that the king's will could be made to outlive his own voice. In Babylon, civilization was not only being ruled, it was being organized, recorded, and monumentalized. But the ancient world was never kind to empires that believed they had secured their place forever. After Hammurabi, Babylon's first great age faded. Successors inherited his throne, but not his force of character. And the empire he had built began to weaken under internal strain and external pressure. Enemies pushed inward, alliances shifted, and the structures of power that had once seemed stable began to crack. Babylon declined, and for a time it appeared that its greatest hour had already passed into memory. Yet some cities are too deeply rooted in geography, trade, and human imagination to disappear so easily, and Babylon was one of them. Centuries later, when the mighty Assyrian Empire began to fracture under the weight of endless warfare, revolt, and overexpansion, Babylon found its second chance. Out of the collapse of one of the ancient world's most feared superpowers, Babylon rose again under Nabopolassar, and then, even more magnificently, under his son Nebuchadnezzar II. This was the Babylon that would live forever in legend, scripture, and the imagination of civilizations yet unborn. This was the Babylon of grand avenues, colossal walls, sacred towers, glittering gates, and royal ambition on a scale the ancient world could scarcely comprehend. Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon into one of the most astonishing cities on earth. He rebuilt its fortifications, restored its temples, and reshaped its ceremonial heart so that the city did not merely function as an imperial capital, but performed power at every level of space and stone. Visitors approaching Babylon would have encountered a city that seemed almost unreal. Vast defensive walls rising from the plain, monumental gates covered in deep blue glazed brick, divine beasts stamped across their surface, and towering structures that proclaimed both earthly power and sacred order. At the spiritual center of this world stood Marduk, Babylon's chief god, for religion and kingship were inseparable in the Babylonian imagination. The city was not simply a place where a king lived. It was a cosmic stage on which heaven, power, ritual, and empire were bound together into one immense vision of civilization. It was during this period that Babylon became not only a center of military and political power, but a symbol of overwhelming magnificence. The city's wealth, architecture, and ceremonial life left such a deep impression on the ancient world that later generations struggled to describe it without slipping into awe. And then there was the legend of the Hanging Gardens, one of the most famous wonders of antiquity. Whether these gardens existed in Babylon exactly as described by later writers remains uncertain, and historians still debate their true location and nature. Yet the very fact that such a story attached itself to Babylon reveals something essential. Babylon was the kind of city that invited exaggeration because it already seemed to exceed ordinary reality. It became, in the minds of many, the ultimate image of imperial splendor, a city so rich, so ordered, so vast, and so radiant with human ambition that it seemed to stand at the edge of the possible. Yet within that magnificence lay the ancient pattern that has shadowed nearly every great empire in history. The more dazzling the power, the greater the strain required to maintain it. The richer the city, the more enemies it attracts. The larger the empire, the more fragile its center can become. Babylon had risen to supreme glory, but like all empires, it lived in a world where no throne remained secure forever. And from the east, another force was rising, disciplined, dynamic, and destined to change the balance of the entire Near East, the Persians under Cyrus the Great. When Cyrus entered Babylon in 539 before Christ, the moment marked one of the great turning points in ancient history. Later imagination often prefers visions of cataclysm. Walls shattered, flames rising, civilization collapsing in one violent stroke. Yet the reality appears to have been more controlled and politically calculated. Babylon was taken and absorbed into the growing Persian Empire, and though the city survived, though its temples remained, though its name still commanded prestige, something fundamental had changed forever. Babylon was no longer the center of the world. Its independence was gone, its destiny redirected into the structure of a larger imperial order, and the age of Babylonian supremacy had come to an end. Still, cities of that magnitude do not vanish in a single day. Babylon remained important under Persian rule, and later, when Alexander the Great swept across the Near East, the city once again seemed poised on the edge of renewed greatness. Alexander was deeply impressed by Babylon and may even have imagined it as a future capital of his empire, a city from which he could rule the vast territories he had conquered. But history turned once more. Alexander died, his empire fractured, and Babylon, though still magnificent in memory, began to lose its political centrality. Trade routes shifted, new capitals rose, imperial attention moved elsewhere, and the long, slow process of decline began. Unlike the dramatic collapses that fill heroic legend, Babylon's final fall was gradual, almost silent. Its canals, once essential to life and power, deteriorated. Its infrastructure weakened. Its temples and palaces, built from mud brick and maintained only through constant labor, began to erode under the pressure of time, weather, and neglect. Generations passed, and the city that had once stood at the summit of civilization slowly surrendered itself back to the landscape from which it had risen. Walls crumbled, sacred structures collapsed, the machinery of imperial life fell quiet, and the center of a world became a ruin. And yet Babylon did not truly disappear, because some cities survived the death of their stones by entering the permanent memory of humankind. Babylon lived on in the Hebrew Bible, in Greek histories, in medieval imagination, in the reports of explorers, and in the dreams of archaeologists who came searching through dust for the remains of one of history's greatest capitals. Its name became more than geography. It became a symbol of glory, arrogance, wealth, order, corruption, civilization, excess, and the perilous human desire to build something that seems strong enough to defeat time itself. That is why Babylon still fascinates us after so many centuries. Its story is not only about one city in ancient Mesopotamia, but about the entire arc of civilization. How human beings gather power, shape law, erect monuments, sanctify kingship, and persuade themselves that what they have built will endure forever. Babylon rose from obscurity to domination, transformed itself into one of the wonders of the ancient world, and shaped the imagination of cultures far beyond its own borders. It taught the world that power could be written into law, displayed in architecture, and wrapped in sacred authority. And then, like every empire that has ever believed itself secure, it discovered the oldest truth in history: that no wall is high enough, no king is mighty enough, and no city is glorious enough to stand forever against time. In the end, Babylon's greatest victory may not have been the lands it ruled or the enemies it conquered, but the fact that its name still lives. Empires stronger in steel and broader in territory have vanished into footnotes, yet Babylon endures in memory as one of the defining symbols of the ancient world. It rose from the river plains, mastered the imagination of its age, dazzled generations with its wealth and ambition, and fell not in a single thunderclap, but in the slow and unstoppable silence that claims all earthly power. And perhaps that is why its story still feels so immense, because Babylon is more than a lost city. It is the eternal reminder that human greatness can reach astonishing heights, and that even at those heights, decline has already begun.